Our presentation is going to use Bayes-Courtier, the redevelopment of an old prison complex, to show how we can use entrepreneurial governance to create a modern community, and it will use the literature from the governance section of the course. This is the overview of our presentation. It's going to start with an introduction, give an overview of the case study, and then look at the literature as it applies to the case study. As a broad introduction to the governance chapters as it applies to our case studies, what we found is that there are blurred lines between public and private sectors in the real estate markets and in urban planning, and that depending on the form of urban governance, different values are guiding urban planning. Specifically, under this lens of entrepreneurial governance, what we see is a neoliberal system of urban planning based on using market theory and the private sector within governance to create different urban communities. In this situation, planners and the market act together, not in contrast to each other. And what we see is that this all acts within the stage of capitalism, which is when you are kind of investing in houses that you're never going to actually live in, and you're creating living communities with profit as the goal. So this is all based on our case study, which is Bayes-Courtier. It's the development of a former prison complex built in the 1970s, which is being redeveloped into a new car-free urban neighborhood. So the central government real estate agency and the municipality of Amsterdam has laid the groundwork for the new neighborhood by creating this competition to see who would develop the land and the real estate there. So 5 teams proposed a plan and a budget for the project. And in the end, OMA, Fabrications, and Lola Landscape Architects have been selected to work in collaboration with AM Real Estate Development to develop this new community. So one quote that really shows what this is all about is, "The Bayes neighborhood is born of expanding human needs in the city. Rather than seeing the past as dead weight, our design treats it as an incentive for creating maximum living quality." So what they're trying to do is create a new community out of something that seemed kind of useless to Amsterdam residents before this. The plan is to have 1,350 homes, 30% of which will be social housing, and then there will also be hotels and workspaces. So these houses will not exist in a vacuum, and there will be various living typologies. They're hoping that it becomes a place for everyone from students and starters to families and seniors, with a variety of free sector and social housing for sale and for rent. So this is what the community looked like beforehand. It was very much isolated to just being a prison. And now it is hopefully going to be redeveloped into a community that looks like this. What they say is that homes are often delivered in the middle of a sandbox and the public space following later. That must be done differently. So they're hoping to create a community surrounding these new homes so that the people really enjoy the community that they're living in. But before we understand how this community is going to be built, we have to understand the model of urban governance that is governing it. So there are 4 different types of urban governance mentioned in Pierre's piece, the first being managerial. At this form of urban governance, the local government is seen as a public organization resolving collective needs and interests through service production and delivery. Corporatist governance is the next one, and it's mostly found in Western Europe, so it should be pretty familiar. These political systems historically characterized a strong etatist tradition that manifests itself in a large public sector, redistributive policies, comprehensive welfare state service provisions, a high degree of political involvement, proportional representation, and strong voluntary associations. So you can see this all throughout Western Europe. The third is pro-growth governance, which is very familiar, especially because it is the governance shown in our case study. Pro-growth governance is a structuring of concerted public-private actions to boost the local economy. So that is exactly what we see happening within this Bayes-Courtier, as they're working together to totally restructure this local economy to create something new and a series of growth for the community. The last form of governance is welfare governance. These types of governance particularly thrives in cities where there's limited growth in the local economy. The main influx of capital into the economy comes through the welfare system, placing these cities in an especially delicate dependency towards the state. So this would be the case if all of this new housing would be social housing, but this, of course, is not the case. So this all relies on institutional theory, which enables us to separate analytically the normative and organizational dimension of local governance. By linking local government structures to an overarching and uniform system of values, the institutional approach shows how politically charged the organizational aspect of local governance is. Furthermore, institutional theory is a critical component in any understanding of urban governance because it highlights systems and values and norms that give meaning, direction, and legitimacy to such a governance. This article has pointed at institutional theory as an attractive theoretical framework in comparative urban politics. One of the future challenges, arguably the most important in this research, is linking institutional theory to regime theory as a means of helping to understand how and why cities display different patterns of public-private formation and objectives, and to reveal the consequences of these patterns. So what is really useful about this is that it uses values to show how these values guide different urban governance techniques. So, for example, how social housing and how different values on green living all come together to create a specific system of pro-growth government in our case study and in the Baise-Courtier neighborhood. So to specifically talk more about entrepreneurial governance that is used within this case study, the main focus of this article discusses the complexities of multi-actor governance and its influence on the implementation of projects. By conducting a comparative analysis of Rotterdam's Kop van Zweed and Belgium's Het Hollandia, it discusses the challenges faced as a result of these complexities and how difficult government systems are able to handle them. So this is going to connect to our case study as it emphasizes the complexity of the relationships between the public and private sectors. So the different actors in the project, like the real estate developers, OMA, fabrications, and architects, as well as the central government and the municipality, all have to work together within entrepreneurial governance. These relationships are very complex as each actor has competing interests and priorities. The competing goals are related to the issues revolving around money, specifically the profit the real estate agents are looking to make compared to the amount of money the government is willing to spend. While this public sector, therefore, is focused on the general public and looking after their interests, the private sectors are more concerned with creating markets to enable earning profits. This can make it difficult to concentrate on the main goal of the project. However, through a central governance system represented in the Netherlands, these interests are better balanced than in a fragmented government system as seen in Belgium. So although private actors are going to act and play a huge role in the Baise-Courtier system, because now that the Netherlands centralized governance has so much centralized power, they should be able to avoid a lot of these problems that are seen in other places with a less centralized government. So in these entrepreneurial governance systems, planners act as market actors and not in contrast to it. Markets in capitalism have long presented planners with great difficulties because the markets with which planners most engage, i.e. those concerned with land and property, are among the least efficient because of widespread imperfections and failure. These imperfections include the dichotomous distinctions between planning and the market, when in fact we believe, and theorists believe, that it should be viewed as a symbiotic relationship. It is evident that planning helps shape, regulate, and stimulate markets, despite planners not realizing their potential, and planners need to view themselves as market actors who are capable of framing and reframing property markets. So the literature leads us to ask three important questions about planners as market actors, and we need to look at how this applies to our case study. So the first question is, how should planners understand the operation of land and property markets? So we believe, and theorists believe, that we need to view this as socially constructed rather than given, or markets as socially constructed rather than given. This means that the government planners need to understand their role in determining prices and demand of new community and developments and creating a market for urban planning. They need to show a better understanding of this role in governance, and we believe that they do this in our case study by creating a competition for private actors to build and redevelop this new neighborhood. They understand their role in reframing the market in Baise-Courtier. The second question is, by what means and to what effect do planners already shape such market processes? And we believe that although planners in practice may not categorize what they do as shaping, regulating, and stimulating markets, we contend that this is a helpful way to think about market engagement and what they already do. We don't restrict ourselves here to merely thinking of statutory planning activities, but instead take the broader view of planning as an activity that includes all policy actions associated with land and property development, including relevant planning, transport, housing, land, environmental policies, etc. Therefore, planners don't just create a market here by the competition that they created for the community, but by setting different environmental standards, by creating a car-free community, and by creating a certain amount of social housing. By setting these standards, they already create this market for the new community. The third question is, how might planners develop their capacity as market actors to shape market processes more effectively? Real market engagement and indeed market transformation in many locations requires emphasis on market-rich information and knowledge, market-relevant skills, and better connectivity with market networks. Therefore, we need to better educate planners under an interdisciplinary approach that better emphasizes their role in the market. Despite daily encounters with other market actors, we often see many planning practitioners struggling with what it means to engage and reconstruct markets rather than be subservient to them. However, we believe that our case studies Baez Courtier reflects the ability of planners to understand their role as market actors, whether they would verbalize this role or not. So the last part of our presentation is going to look at the real estate market, specifically looking at Thuriat's piece. In this piece, he focuses on the 3 stages of economic life described by Brodel, which are described as self-provision, then the market, and then capitalism. But we're going to focus mostly on capitalism because the first 2 stages mainly take place within the household and are a little too simple to talk about what happens in our case study. So the author of the piece we focus on splits the capitalism phase into real and financialized. Real being more physical developments and interpersonal relationships, where financialized capitalism is focused more on portfolio managers, both standardized and abstract, and people who never actually develop anything or see any real physical growth within the urban development that they talk about. The real estate market in the third stage, capitalism, is classified by those who invest in real estate in order to make a profit. They invest in these cities that they're not necessarily going to live in to create urban rent, which is defined as the result of the general increase in the value of the city. And investors have been increasingly interested in this built environment since the financial crisis. And to quote from the text, this interest stems on the one hand from institutional reforms affecting the financial markets and the development of mutual funds managed centrally by institutional investors. And on the other hand, it stems from the ready availability of property following the privatization and outsourcing of business and governmental real estate in various countries. Therefore, these financial institutions and developers work together to invest in communities that have not been sold or rented yet, and in the case of our case study, barely exist yet. So this creates a clear process of gentrification, especially within our case study. This is characterized by 4 main characteristics: the reinvestment of capital in certain urban areas, the arrival of groups of a higher socioeconomic status, transformations of the built environment and landscapes, and the effects of eviction. So this is pretty self-explanatory that gentrification is happening in this new real estate market. So in this stage, projects and investments often redevelop entire areas like this former prison community to create a totally new and richer real estate market, despite the fact that 30% of it will be social housing. So if we want to place our case study in the context of this chart, we can place it in the section of real estate capitalism so that they're hoping to see a huge increase in urban rent, which is what's motivating these investors and developers and the government to create this new community. So this is an example of how private and public interests work together to create the current real estate market and to try to solve the housing crisis and to create new, greener communities based on Amsterdam's values. The government will use market techniques like competition, therefore, to attract investors and development firms to certain areas to create new, thriving communities in Amsterdam.